Hello, and thanks for tuning in. Today's topic, we will be discussing the renal system. Okay, so components of the renal system. It's also called if you're looking in a textbook or comparing to other classes, it's also called the urinary system or excretory system. The major function of this system is elimination of waste products. So what are the components that we see within this system? We have two kidneys, which are going to extract waste from the blood, balance body fluids, and form urine. We have two ureters, and the ureters are going to connect to the kidney to the urinary bladder. We have a single urinary bladder, which is going to serve as a storage location for our urine. And then lastly, we have a urethra, which is going to connect the urinary bladder to the outside world. Okay, so here you can see pretty much all of these components. So two kidneys, again, the connection tube from the kidneys to the urinary bladder is known as the ureter. And then the urethra is the tube that's going to exit the bladder and allow us to get rid of that waste to the outside world. Okay. So again, when we think about the kidneys, what are they involved in? Kidneys are involved in the following processes. So number one, excretion of unwanted substances. This is primarily going to be urea, which is a nitrogen-containing waste from amino acid metabolism. So again, if we break down proteins into amino acids or break down those amino acids, they will produce a product known as urea. And again, that's the primary substance that we need to get rid of. Other metabolic wastes will also be eliminated within the excretory system here. Excess salts and toxins can also be excreted within this pathway. Can assist with water balance. So again, we can alter water loss through urine. So again, we can do some things with hormones to help us retain fluid, but also we can use this system as a way to get rid of excess fluids. Okay. Acid-base balance is another important function. Okay. So we can eliminate or retain bicarbonate, which is a basic component, and that'll allow us to assist in the acid-base balance process. And also regulation of red blood cell production. So this is related to the hormones known as renin and angiotensin, and this will affect our fluid retention and hence affects the blood pressure as well. Okay. I'm sorry, that was regulation of blood pressure. And then regulation of red blood cell production. Erythropoietin is a hormone that will be used to produce new red blood cells. There we go. So let's have a look at the overall structure of the kidney. Again, when we look at the anatomy of this particular organ, you can see that the cortex is kind of found here, and that's going to be like this outer little portions kind of in an orange color here. Okay, we have the medulla, which are this inner kind of like these pink section in here, these inner tubes, and the medulla is where urine is formed and collected. And we have these cone-shaped structures within the medulla that are known as renal pyramids. And these renal pyramids are going to point towards the renal pelvis. Here you can see the renal pelvis is kind of in yellow. And the renal pelvis is going to dump into the ureter, which is here. So again, I'm going to filter things within the renal pyramids, which lie within the medulla. And those unwanted waste products will then gather in the renal pelvis, where they will be then moved into the ureter so that we can move them down to the urinary bladder to be stored. Okay. If we zoom in a little bit deeper and look under a microscope, we can see the nephron, and the nephron is the basic unit of the kidney. Each kidney contains about 1 million nephrons. So really important component for us. And again, this will be our most basic unit for filtration and absorption. And again, we'll take a look at those processes here coming up. Okay. So let's take a look at the components of the nephron. So again, we said this was kind of like our most basic unit associated with that filtration process within the kidneys. First thing we can look at is Bowman's capsule, which you can see here. Also sometimes known as the glomerular capsule because it contains the glomerulus, and you can see the glomerulus is kind of like underneath Bowman's capsule, or inside of, I should say. So Bowman's capsule is like this yellow thing here. The glomerulus is the red stuff that's inside or medial or intermediate to Bowman's capsule. Okay. Glomerulus in Latin means ball of yarn, and this will serve as the nephron's filtering device. Okay, so again, you can kind of see that within here. Next thing that we can look at within the nephron is the renal tubule. Okay, so the renal tubule is all this yellow stuff right here, and this includes the remainder of the nephron. So it includes the proximal tubule, which you can see number 1, right at the exit of the glomerulus. Also sometimes called the proximal convoluted tubule. Next we have the loop of Henle, which is down here. Also sometimes called the nephron loop. Next thing we can see is the distal tubule, which is shown here. Also sometimes called the distal convoluted tubule. And this tubule will empty into the collecting duct, which is here. And this will move the filtrate towards the renal pelvis, or towards that center of the kidney. Okay, so again, when we think about the nephron versus the components associated with such, again, it's important to keep in mind that the job of the nephron is to filter the blood, so we can understand why there's like a bunch of different blood vessels and stuff like hanging out around each individual nephron. Okay, so we have an afferent arteriole, which you can see here, and the afferent arteriole is going to supply the glomerulus with blood, and then you have the efferent arteriole, which is going to carry blood away from the glomerulus to the peritubular capillaries. And the peritubular capillaries, you can see here, are kind of intertwined with the loop of Henle and that distal and proximal tubule. Okay. We also have a juxtaglomerular apparatus. And let's see, here we go. You can see that here. And the juxtaglomerular apparatus involves the distal convoluted tubule and the afferent arteriole. And this is going to help us to regulate blood flow, pressure, and also the filtration rate associated with this particular neuron. Okay, so again, remember that what we're trying to do is we're trying to filter out the blood for anything like bad or anything like waste that we want to get rid of. So these are going to be really closely connected. Okay, so formation of urine. So urine formation is like pretty complex actually, and it involves us moving items back and forth from the bloodstream into the nephron and then vice versa. Okay, so again, we're going to move things in and out of that nephron, in and out of those tubules in order for us to determine what it is that we want to actually keep and what it is that we want to get rid of. So 3 processes are going to allow the kidneys to kind of fine-tune those body fluids as they start to adjust the urine composition. First is glomerular filtration, next is tubular reabsorption, and then finally we have tubular secretion. Okay, so I'll say those one more time: glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion. So again, here you can see, this is nothing I'm going to test you on. I just want you to see the complexity of the movement of those molecules. Okay, so here again, you can see the afferent arteriole heading into the glomerulus, and the efferent arteriole exiting the glomerulus, or excuse me. And then I want you to pay attention to all the movement of all these molecules. So sugar, amino acids, and sodium are filtered out. Then you see sodium, potassium, chloride, sodium, potassium, chloride again here. Look at the movement of all of these different molecules. Again, I just want you to appreciate the complexity of this system, and you know, what all is going on and what all goes into us producing the urine. Okay, so let's start with glomerular filtration. Okay, so again, components to look at. So you've got the afferent arteriole, which is going to bring blood in. I have the glomerulus, which we said was kind of this like ball of yarn of vessels. And then I have the efferent arteriole, which is going to take blood out. Okay, all of these things are going to take place within Bowman's capsule. And basically what happens is this blood comes in. I'm going to filter out some things. So some things are going to move from the glomerulus into Bowman's capsule, and those will enter into the proximal tubule. Okay. Once those components move from in the bloodstream, the glomerulus, into the proximal tubule, they're now known as filtrate. Okay, so the items that are found within the nephron are known as filtrate. Okay, anything that didn't get filtered out will then head into the efferent arteriole. Okay, because of the diameter of the afferent arteriole, it's very small, there's high pressure in the arteriole. So this pressure in this particular blood vessel is 3 to 4 times greater than that which we find in any other capillaries. And again, that's a good thing, because that's going to help us to move those blood molecules, or the things within the blood, from inside the blood into Bowman's capsule. Okay. So movement of materials under pressure form the blood into the glomerular capsule, and this is known as filtration. Okay, so the fluid that enters the glomerular capsule is known as glomerular filtrate. Okay, so again, we're moving a significant amount of fluid from here into here, and that's going to help us to establish kind of that first step with producing urine. Next thing that can happen is known as tubular reabsorption. So again, notice here the movement from glomerular capillaries into Bowman's capsule was known as filtration. The next step that we are going to look at is known as tubular reabsorption. And tubular reabsorption involves us moving that filtrate from inside of the nephron to into the peritubular capillaries. Okay. To give you kind of a feel for what this looks like, or how big of a process this is, the kidneys form 160 to 180 liters of filtrate per day, but we only produce 1 to 1.5 liters of urine each day. So less than 1% of items that are originally filtered, which starts right here, are actually removed from the body. Okay, so we're going to move a shit ton of stuff into Bowman's capsule, but then we're also going to move most of it back into the peritubular capillaries through tubular reabsorption. Okay. Let's see, water and other substances move from the nephron tubule into the peritubular capillaries. That was that reabsorption rate. Urea and other waste products are kept in the tubule, and those will be eliminated in the urine. Glucose reabsorption. So glucose is reabsorbed along with sodium in that early portion of the proximal tubule. Essentially, all the glucose should be reabsorbed, and no more than a few milligrams should appear in the urine. If we do happen to see glucose in the urine, and again, we would be able to test this via urinalysis, this may indicate diabetes. And again, that could be type 1 or type 2 diabetes, depending on, you know, the the person's age and, many other factors. So, okay. Then the last process involves tubular secretion. And again, now I'm going to take things from the capillary, put them back into the distal tubule or that collecting duct, and those will become urine. Okay, so this is a last final adjustment. Items are put back into the tubule right before they're eliminated. Hydrogen and potassium are both moved via tubular secretion, so that's how we get rid of those two particular molecules. Okay. So again, here you can kind of see all three of those processes occurring. So and again, it's important that we know where they're happening within the system and which direction they're moving as well. Okay, so glomerular filtration is the first step, and that's going to involve movement from the blood into the nephron, okay, and that occurs at the level of the glomerular capillaries into Bowman's capsule, okay. The next process that will occur is tubular reabsorption, and that's movement of items from inside the nephron to into the bloodstream, okay, and that'll occur at the level of the proximal tubule loop of Henle. And then the last process, the one final adjustment, involves tubular secretion, which includes the movement of molecules from the bloodstream into the nephron, and that'll be at the level of that distal tubule, or that distal convoluted tubule. Okay, so again, when we are trying to understand what excretion looks like, again, that total loss of fluid from the body in the form of the urine, how we can calculate how much we are getting rid of, we need to look at the amount that's filtered. Again, we said there was a lot that was going to be filtered, and add that with the amount that's secreted in comparison to subtracting the amount that's reabsorbed. Okay. Again, we said one of the other roles associated with the kidney, one of its other functions was its role in maintaining acid-base balance, which we know is an important component of homeostasis. So hydrogen ions are secreted in the distal tubules. Again, 90% of our bicarbonate is reabsorbed. And when we think about the balance of acid and basic molecules, again, we want to maintain our level of acidity within this kind of like narrow range. And so bicarbonate is very basic in nature, and hydrogen is very acidic in nature. So if I need to increase the acidity within the blood, I could hold on to more hydrogen. If I need to increase the basicness of the blood or the alkalinity, we can hold on to bicarbonate and get rid of hydrogen, okay? So kidneys can also generate bicarbonate or generate that basic component so that we can maintain this balance. Substances affecting renal function. So again, several different hormones, and we'll take a look at each of these and understand how they're affecting fluid retention in particular, but also salt movement as well. Okay, so let's start with aldosterone. Aldosterone is a hormone that is released from the adrenal cortex when blood pressure gets too low or potassium levels get too high. And aldosterone's job is to help us reabsorb sodium. And as you might already know, sodium is hydrophilic or water loving. It wants to pull water along with it. So if I reabsorb sodium, I will also reabsorb water. And this will help us to conserve water and increase blood pressure. Antidiuretic hormone, again, if you remember what a diuretic is, something like coffee or alcohol, it makes you pee a lot. So something that's an antidiuretic would help you to not pee a lot, okay? And that's essentially what antidiuretic hormone does. So it's made in the thalamus, it's released from the posterior pituitary, and it's released when blood pressure falls or blood becomes too concentrated. And the idea with this is it's going to help us to retain fluid, okay? So ADH and aldosterone are going to work together in order for us to achieve this process of water conservation. Okay, so ADH, or antidiuretic hormone, is going to promote water reabsorption from the distal tubule and the collecting duct, and conserves water and makes the urine more concentrated in nature. So the urine will be more full of different ions and less full of like plain fluids such as water. ANP, or atrial natriuretic peptide, is produced in the atrial myocardial cells, and it's released when blood pressure is too high. Okay, so again, it's produced in the atria of the heart, and when blood pressure gets too high, this will be released. It causes the kidneys to excrete sodium in water and helps us to decrease blood pressure and blood volume. So again, ANP is going to work in opposition of aldosterone and ADH. The renin and angiotensin systems. So renin is an enzyme produced by renal cells when blood pressure falls, and its action is to cause constriction of blood vessels to raise blood pressure. It increases fluid volume by stimulating thirst and promoting the release of aldosterone and ADH. So again, it's going to be activated by angiotensin. Okay. Again, keep in mind that these are going to work together. So angiotensin is produced by protein in the blood that's activated by renin. Okay, so again, when we think about action, action of renin is to activate angiotensin. Angiotensin's action is to constrict blood vessels, to raise blood pressure, increase fluid volume by stimulating thirst, and promoting the release of aldosterone and ADH. Okay. So here you can see the total, like the angiotensin renin system. Again, I'm not going to ask you many details about this, but I do want you to appreciate everything that's involved in us being able to regulate blood pressure, fluid volume, thirst, and what the role is of the kidneys in this particular complicated system, really. So again, you can see the relationship. The liver is involved. We've got stuff going on in the lungs. Adrenal cortex, again, will release some of those hormones for us. And again, here's what's going to happen. So we're going to have an effect on fluid and thirst, and also water conservation, as well as sodium levels. Okay. Again, if I wanted to lose sodium, here you can see the relationship between ANP, or atrial natriuretic peptide. So again, this will play a role to help us to monitor blood pressure, and it'll do that through the ability of us to either get rid of fluid or maintain that fluid. Okay. Again, here you can see the relationship between renin, angiotensin, and aldosterone. And again, we said aldosterone and ADH are going to work closely together and really have the same function. Okay, so both of them want to help us retain fluid, and so we're going to do that through decreasing sodium excretion, and the reason for that is water will also be pulled along when we hold on to or retain that particular molecule. Okay. So when we look at the concentration of urine, again, we're looking at the end products of nitrogen metabolism processes, and again, these end products come from the breakdown of proteins or amino acids, and this will include urea, uric acid, and creatinine. Again, this is different than creatine, and we'll talk about creatine when we talk about our metabolism unit in the second portion of this class, but creatinine is a different molecule. Okay. We're also going to get rid of sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, calcium, water, ammonium, sulfates, and phosphates. So quite a bit of things are going to be within the urine. Again, we could find trace amounts of glucose potentially. We could find some trace amounts of protein as well. And there's a variety of reasons why somebody might spill protein within their urine. Again, it could be related to a dehydration issue and we're not able to sustain those molecules as a result. Okay. So here you can see kind of the breakdown of what we're being able to excrete. So urea makes up the majority of our urine. Again, the names sound familiar, so that makes sense. Check out all the other things that we're getting rid of. Sodium, potassium, creatinine is another important component. Components of amino acids or proteins, like I mentioned, can be eliminated in urine as well. Just a couple examples. Okay. Creatinine. Okay, so I was going to talk more about it. So again, different than creatine, but it is very closely related. It is the end product of muscle creatine metabolism. And this is actually used in a clinical setting to measure our glomerular filtration rate. So we want to have a small amount secreted from the tubule. So if I have a high concentration of creatinine in my urine, that would indicate that I had some level of kidney damage. So again, I'm maybe not able to reabsorb molecules back into the blood. So that might be the potential issue, but we can use creatinine levels as a way or a marker for us to determine if somebody maybe has suffered from some kidney damage of some sort or has a decrease in kidney function even. Okay, so now let's take a look at micturition or peeing. Okay, so how does this work, right? So first, the urinary, first urine enters the renal pelvis, and then it'll flow through the ureters and enter into the urinary bladder. And again, the bladder will serve as a storage location for that urine. Okay, so micturition is the process of emptying the urinary bladder or peeing. Okay, two things. Number one, that bladder will progressively fill until the tension in its walls rise above a threshold level. Again, if you remember back to our tissues unit so long ago, it seems like, you would remember that the lining of the bladder is made up of this transitional epithelium. So it's kind of stretchy, right? So again, when my bladder is empty, it's very small, but as I start to fill my bladder with urine, it's going to stretch the transitional epithelium found in the walls until it rises to a threshold level. Okay. Then we have a nervous reflex that's called the micturition reflex, and this will allow us to empty the bladder. So again, once that urinary bladder gets filled up, we are going to, sorry, let me get my laser out here, stimulate the smooth muscle lining that, and this will cause, we have two different sphincters. We have an internal urethral sphincter, and then we also have an external urethral sphincter. Again, the internal is a smooth muscle. Okay, so again, I'm not in control of this one. And those stretch receptors are going to be activated. They'll send a signal up to the brain, and then you decide when it's okay to urinate. And as a result, that will cause the external urethral sphincter to relax and then release the urine. Okay, when it's not okay to pee, then you will keep that the external urethral sphincter contracted until you decide it's the appropriate time to urinate. All right, I think that's it. I hope you guys have a great day, and do let me know if you have any questions on this particular unit.